Good morning, Dan and Amy. And one of the things we're finding from the pandemic is just how interconnected the world is. Certainly when we talk about supply webs, economic interconnectedness. And we're talking about it in the sense of transmission of a virus because we're social creatures. But what about the interconnectedness of human networks and their impacts in ways that maybe we didn't imagine before and should contemplate now, particularly as so many have spent some time in more isolation than they obviously otherwise would. Kay Hymowitz has a piece on the topic called The Human Network, which is sort of fascinating, how things you don't necessarily think of as potentially contagious actually can be, according to some research, including divorce. Divorce as contagious. Kay Hymowitz is a senior fellow, Manhattan Institute, contributing editor to City Journal, and author of The New Brooklyn, What It Takes to Bring a City Back. Kay, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. So why don't we start with divorce, because that's one of the more provocative contagions you write about in your piece, and what we should glean from some of the studies into the contagiousness of divorce.
Right. So there was a important study that was done some years ago by a group of researchers who were they had access to a large data set, longitudinal data, that means of data over years, so that they could trace individuals and their outcomes in various ways. It was a heart study, so they were mostly interested in health, but they also kept track of social factors as well. So these researchers looked at that data and said, well, what about divorce? Because one of them was in the midst of a divorce and noticed that a lot of her friends seemed to be getting divorced at the same time. And sure enough, what they found by doing lots of calculations on this was that if you had close friends who were divorcing, your chances of divorce went up about 75%. And if you have friends of friends divorcing, your chances would go up 33%. So it's kind of shocking, isn't it? Because
75%, yeah, especially. That's a big jump.
Right. We think of this as such a personal decision, and people mull over it and struggle with it and worry about it. But it turns out that it's not something in the air. There's something about human nature that begins to adapt itself to people around each other. So if you see other people divorcing, it makes it a possibility or even a norm that didn't exist before that. So that's how they think it works.
Right, because if you see a friend who's miserable in a marriage, then she gets out of it, and all of a sudden, wow, she's lost weight, she's happy, then people think, oh, maybe I can experience some of that happiness.
Well, if that's very cynical, Amy.
Oh, I'm not cynical at all. Okay.
Yeah. Another way to look at it is say, Joe got rid of his wife. Right. Let me give my wife a once-over. Maybe it's time I follow suit.
Yeah. I think that, all of those scenarios happen, I'm sure. But I think the larger point that extends to other kinds of social behavior, other kinds of values and beliefs, and et cetera, suggests that it's also just what's normal. That is what's acceptable within a network. And I should mention that each of us is involved in many different networks. We're not just creatures of one in a very complex society like ours. So, we have networks of girlfriends, let's say, Amy and I, right? We have networks from the workplace. Sure. We have networks from church or synagogue or whatever. We have networks all over the place of other kinds of friends. And, of course, we have networks of family members. So all of those networks connect us not just to one other person or a group of other people, but also the people that they're connected to. And what's interesting about it at this time of the coronavirus is that you can see how the virus spreads. Just as you might be able to you might, if you caught the virus, spread it to your best friend, and then your best friend spreads it to her uncle, right? And the uncle then is in a nursing home and spreads it to the staff member, and so on. So you can see how these networks work, and these social behaviors turn out to have a similar route of transmission.
Well, right. I mean, we're seeing some of that with the COVID-19 response. I mean, just for example, the divide on mask wearing, for example, and maybe it's, much of that is influenced by the social networks in which you're a member.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's no question that politics and political views can be influenced by social networks. I mean, I should add that some of this is self-selection. That is, you're attracted to people who are like you in some ways, but you can also be influenced by them. So both things operate.
Also, emotion. You confirm the Steve Martin, Charles Grodin movie that you put the science behind The Lonely Guy.
The Dan Proft story.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So check it out. No, but the idea that you know, it's sort of one of these fun little plays on words like stay in together during COVID-19. This is you know, stay lonely together.
Yeah, there is some reason to think that loneliness spreads, and it isn't just that lonely people are attracted to each other. I mean, lonely people, by their very definition, are not particularly interested in other people, or not especially attracted to other people of all sorts. However, if you're a friend of somebody who's very lonely, and you're visiting them or talking to them, and their mood actually can have an effect on you. And we all know that there is such a thing as emotional contagion. Think of going to a rock concert, something that we won't be doing for a while, but the excitement, the energy, all of that's social contagion also.
No, I mean, it's in part the theory behind the madness of crowds.
Yes, exactly.
I also wanted to get to the issue of the social networks for you know, other reasons, organizing reasons around a certain mission, like for example the education of your children, and just and you say about how divorce is contagious. Since the California collegiate system just dumped the SAT and ACT for admissions. Against that backdrop, Brad Wilcox, who's an American Enterprise Institute scholar and a sociology professor, and to address this issue of SAT scores, and he finds family structure is about as important as family income in predicting who graduates from college today. In the absence of SAT scores, which can pinpoint kids from difficult family backgrounds with great academic potential, family stability is likely to loom even larger in determining who makes it past the college finish line in California. And you know, he basically says what Charles Murray wrote about in Coming Apart in 2012, which is you want your kids to do well in school and go to particularly if you want them to go to a premier college, get married and stay married.
And get married, stay married, and move to a neighborhood where lots of kids go to college is what I would add to that.
Yeah.
That's what the social network theories suggest. You know, when they're asking how good is the school system, in effect, they're also asking how good is the social network my child will be around.
And so, and so this makes it, that this helps provide context to the argument about modeling success in neighborhoods that are downtrodden, neighborhoods that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. They haven't seen enough models of success to know what it looks like. They've seen a lot of models of destruction, and so that has a contagious effect just like success does.
Yes, exactly. I have another section in the article about poverty and about particularly poor adolescents and what their options are. And there is something fatalistic about network theory because there's only a certain amount of people who can break out of the networks around them. Most will not. We are human creatures who adapt to the society around us in as much as we can.
She is
And
Kate. Go ahead.
Can I ask one more question, Kate? Do you have a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, about you also wrote in your article about voting. It's a norm within many social networks, so one vote can multiply into 3. And we do have an election about 6 months away from now.
Yeah. So, I've always wondered why this emphasis on the get out the vote. I mean, I always thought, well, people vote or they don't. Do they want to vote or they don't? But in fact, there is some impact of these get out the vote efforts. They've shown that if somebody comes to your door and tells to try to convince you to vote, if somebody else is in the house or in the room at the same time, they're more likely to vote too, and so on. With their friends, family, and so forth. So voting spreads. The habit of voting spreads, the expectation of voting spreads, and you're more likely to be connected to people who either vote or don't vote as you do.
She is Kay Hymowitz, Senior Fellow, Manhattan Institute, contributing editor, City Journal, author of The New Brooklyn, What It Takes to Bring a City Back, and check out her piece that we were discussing, The Human Network, as well, which we'll tweet out. Kay, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Kay. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
If you're thinking of replacing your carpets due to pet stains and odors, you must try Genesis 950. Genesis 950 with water breaks down the bonds of stains and odors so they're gone for good. Its antibacterial component removes pet odors from carpet and padding. It can even be